Hey guys, we got 2 episodes last night, so you get to hear from an even more sleep-deprived me as we break down the Rings of Power episode titled Adrift. This episode we have a series opening, which I had honestly forgotten about a bit, and it's fine. I think the title reveal was actually way better than this. It kind of follows the fantasy trope of following small things around and gradually revealing bigger things. It seems we have grains of sand here which first form what looks like 9 rings, possibly alluding to the 9 rings of men. The next distinguishable image is 2 trees, which I believe symbolize the white tree of Nimloth in Numenor, as we notice the similarities between this and the later Gondorian symbol. I didn't recognize any other symbols, but the next notable thing we have are black grains of sand moving into the image. This right here looks to be a mountain, perhaps the holy mountain of Meneltarma in Numenor. And when we get the title, these 3 circles might represent the 3 elven rings, but I really don't know. We open with Galadriel, who's in the middle of the Sundering Sea and decides to just keep swimming. And right away we're off to Nori and Meteor Man. Poppy shows up and Nori falls into the crater and her hands land right in some of the coals. But she notes that it's not hot. Now going back to the beginning of episode 1, Galadriel tells one of her elves that he can't feel the flame because the place they're in is so evil. Could this mean that Meteor Man isn't a wizard and is actually an evil character like Sauron or a Balrog? I just can't think this is a coincidence that in 2 episodes we get 2 instances of things that should be hot and are not. Meteor Man wakes up and grabs Nori's hand and we see the rocks rise and swirl around them. The fire retreats seemingly into the stranger himself. And last of all, we see the flames reflected in his eyes. He passes out and all the flames return around the crater. We catch up with the other Harfoots who are freaked out by the crash, and Nori and Poppy start pushing the stranger in a cart, and after almost losing him, they set up camp for him beneath some trees. And Nori starts talking about how she feels like she's meant to help him, and needs to make sure he's safe. So 2 things here. I gotta say, as skeptical as I remain about the Harfoots, the actress who plays Nori is really good in her role. And second, her feeling like she's meant to help him gives me this morbid thought of how darkly funny it would be if the stranger is actually a Balrog, and she totally makes things a million times worse in Middle-earth. That would definitely shy away from hobbits always saving the day. Nice transition to Arondir and Bronwyn in the remains of the village, and they notice there are no bodies or wounded. Then they realize there's a tunnel going beneath the town, and Arondir resolves to follow the passage back to its source, while Bronwyn goes back to Tirharad to warn her people. Cut to the glorious realm of Eregion. This specifically looks to be the capital of Ost-in-Ethil, home of Celebrimbor's Gwaith y Myrdain, the famed jewel-smiths of Eregion. And right off the bat we get a shot and story of Feanor's hammer. Elrond talks about it being the tool that wrought the Silmarils, and how it brought about so much beauty and so much pain. And Elrond, as we discussed in the last breakdown, knows this all too well, as it's Feanor's oath that leads his sons to drive off his mother and kidnap he and his twin brother Elros. And I honestly love Celebrimbor's expression here because he just kind of seems over Elrond's mixture of fanboying and dissing his grandfather. He answers Elrond saying, "True creation requires sacrifice," which, considering the hardship Elrond has suffered because of Feanor, could be seen as kind of a jerky thing to say. Celebrimbor goes on to tell a rumored story that Morgoth, after stealing the Silmarils, stared into their depths for weeks. And when his tear fell upon the Silmarils, he was faced with the evil of his own reflection and never looked into them again. Celebrimbor declares that the beauty of Feanor's work nearly turned the heart of the great foe himself. So the common question will be, is this a canon story about Morgoth? In short, no it's not. I appreciate that Celebrimbor frames it beginning with "they say" as if it's a rumor and could be just a story. And the idea that Morgoth's heart could be turned is one I highly doubt. However, it's not so far-fetched that Morgoth would be affected by great beauty. In the tale of Beren and Luthien, as the couple comes into Morgoth's fortress, we read, "Out of the shadows began a song of such surpassing loveliness and of such blinding power that Morgoth listened perforce, and a blindness came upon him, and his eyes roam to and fro, seeking her. So we see once again a possible way the show is paying homage to this idea that there is such surpassing beauty that Morgoth could be affected, just in a different way that they can legally tell. Celebrimbor then reflects, wondering what has his work ever accomplished. And while Elrond says it has turned his heart and the hearts of many elves, Celebrimbor says he aspires to do far more than that. He wishes to fill the world with beauty and devise something of real power. He reveals to Elrond that his plan is to build a tower housing a great forge that could burn as hot as a dragon's tongue and as pure as starlight. Now I'm growing ever more certain that his goal is to create something that will allow the elves to make their realms remain ever beautiful, forestalling the decays of the world. And we know that this is exactly what the Elven Rings of Power do. So while I don't think Celebrimbor has rings in mind yet, I'm guessing a helpful Lord of Gifts may come calling later with the suggestion. The catch here is he needs it completed by spring, which Elrond says would require a workforce greater than any assembled. Celebrimbor responds that Gil-galad couldn't provide one, so he sent Elrond instead, which definitely made me chuckle a little bit. Elrond comes up with an idea that clearly involves using the dwarves. Another glorious map shot, and we're outside the realm of Khazad-dum. We find that Celebrimbor has a great admiration for the dwarves, which I'm hoping sets up the friendship between not just him and the dwarves, but specifically the dwarf smith Narvi. As we see in this scene, the doors of Durin we know from Fellowship of the Ring do not yet exist, so it would be awesome to see those built down the road. Elrond expects a welcome, and instead gets the Jabba's palace treatment, so he walks up to the door and invokes the rite of Sigin Tarag. And as Elrond heads in, and Bear McCreary's awesome khazad-dum track kicks in, we bid farewell to Celebrimbor. And I have to reiterate how much more I enjoyed this character than I thought I would. I said this in my non-spoiler review, but I honestly thought I wouldn't like him as much because I'm such a fan of the Shadow of Mordor depiction. But I think my friends who are telling me that Charles Edwards would do really well in the role will likely be proven right. It's not the depiction I had in my mind, but I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more of him. And here we experience the splendor of Khazad-dum, and Elrond exclaims, Elmendea, which is a Quenya term of wonderment. And I quite agree. Khazad-dum looks phenomenal in this show. Elrond enters a chamber, and following him is Durin IV, who Elrond begins to greet warmly, only to have Durin keep referring to him as the elf. We get a rundown of Sigin Tarag. If Durin wins, Elrond is banished from all Dwarven lands forever. And if Elrond wins, he gets a single boon, or a favor, from Durin. The contest involves the two alternating breaking rocks. The first one to give in loses. We get our first name drop of one of the Valar, when Durin says this contest was fashioned by Aule himself. Aule is the Vala who created the dwarves, and their people naturally have a strong connection to him. Now, if you're wondering, Sigin Tarag is a Khazad-dum phrase made by Tolkien himself that translates to Longbeards, which is another name for Durin's folk, the dwarves of Khazad-dum. The contest gets underway, and now's a good time to point out the interesting design element on Elrond's attire. He seems to have feathers on his shoulders, and most believe the significance here is that this is a reference to Elrond's mother, Elwing. When she dove into the sea to escape the kinslaying, she was temporarily given the form of a white bird as she flew to reunite with her husband. We cut to Nori going to check on the stranger, and we find him writing on a stone. There's some whispering going on, and while I initially thought it was a creepy effect like the One Ring, I think it might be the stranger murmuring to himself. Nori says hello, and Meteor Man returns the favor by going all Gandalf and Bag End on her, with the trees bending over, the wind whipping around, and everything going darker. This, along with a later moment, sure makes it feel like this guy's Gandalf. But I'm personally rooting for someone else, as I think it would be too on the nose, and it would be far more fun for him to be one of the Blue Wizards, who don't have a well-known history or an iconic performance that this would surely be compared to. As far as what he's drawing, we later learn that they're constellations, and I don't really have any clue where they're meant to be viewed from. The stranger chills out, and he and Nori share some delicious snails. Back at Harfoot headquarters, Nori's father Largo breaks his ankle trying to put up a tent, while Meteor Man starts drawing in the dirt. This almost looks like it could be a rudimentary map of Mordor. And the next rune is likely what everyone is talking about. And while it is similar to Gandalf's G rune, it's actually backwards. And if it were a rune, it would actually be the GH sound. Also, Meteor Man keeps repeating mana and ure together. The popular theories online are that these words are either him questioning what is heat or saying blessed heat. Looking at all the possible root words, the good folks in my Discord found that it could possibly mean hand of heat. And as we heard from Galadriel last episode, Sauron's very hand is flame unquenched. So I'm thinking that would be evidence for him being a wizard, looking for Mordor and the one with the hand of heat. Halfway through the episode, we check back in with Galadriel, who's splashing about in the sea. She comes across some shipwrecked men and hides her pointy ears under her hair to hide that she's an elf. The humans debate whether to bring her on, and when they do, Galadriel discovers they've been attacked by what they call the Worm. In one of his first lines, Halbrand says, "Looks can be deceiving," which at this point feels pretty on the nose for him to turn out to be Sauron. Personally, I'm kinda hoping this guy turns into the Witch King later. They reveal Galadriel's ears and the worm makes an appearance. Now, fun fact, Tolkien also referred to his sea serpents as fish dragons. So you should totally use that term from now on, as I will, because it's pretty great. So the fish dragon wrecks the raft, and Galadriel and Halbrand end up stranded on a smaller portion of the raft. Before this, we do get a quick shot of Halbrand separating his portion of the raft from the others, which points to him totally ditching everyone else to save his own skin, and Galadriel calls him out for it later. And yes, I've heard the rumors of Halbrand being Sauron and that he and Galadriel have some romance, and I really hope that's not the case because it sounds like a terrible idea. Back to the rock smashing, where Elrond breaks his axe and finally forfeits. Durin agrees to see Elrond to the exit, and they take a lift where we find out why Durin is mad at Elrond. Elrond hasn't been around in 20 years, and in that time, Durin has gotten married and had 2 children. It's honestly one of the most moving scenes in the show so far, and I think the Durin-Elrond storyline in general is one of the bigger favorites so far based on polls in last night's watch party and online chatter. Now, I did kind of wonder why Elrond would be so clueless as to the importance of time to mortal characters, when his twin brother was one. But we're never told for sure that they ever saw each other after Elros founds Numenor, so that's kind of murky. It's also worth noting that it's not uncommon for dwarves to live 250 years or so 20 years for them isn't quite as daunting as it is to a normal man. Granted, as Durin points out, a lot has happened in that 20 years. And he's clearly hurt and missing his buddy. Setting minor technicalities aside, I love this scene, and I think I'm going to really enjoy this friendship in the episodes to come. Elrond apologizes and wishes to apologize to Durin's family, which kicks off one of the more humorous scenes in the show. But first, real quick, at the top of the lift we see what appears to be a raven, a possible connection to The Hobbit where the dwarves use ravens as messengers. In Durin's home we meet his wife, Disa, who insists on Elrond staying for dinner, and I really enjoy the interplay between these 3 characters in this scene. But first we see Durin and Disa's children, Gerda and Gamli, playing with giant head statues, and here we get a second cameo of the dragon helm of Dorlomin. In episode 1 it was the carving of Fingon, but the connection here is that the helm is originally made by the dwarf smith Telkar, who incidentally also forged Elendil's blade, Narsil. Elrond sits down to dinner where Disa explains their tradition of singing to the stone to determine where to dig and where not to dig. Perhaps a bit of foreshadowing for them not making their best judgment in where not to dig. Durin continues to be really harsh toward Elrond, which at one point leads Disa to exclaim Aule's beard, which totally made me think of Merlin's beard from Harry Potter. Elrond points out that Durin planted the seedling from the great tree in Lindon, and Disa points out that Durin cares for it like it's their 3rd child. Again, I love these moments that show the great friendship between these 2 characters, that while frayed now, will hopefully be on the mend soon. Elrond mentions the tree in Lindon is a sign of their people's strength and vitality, which again doesn't bode well for what Gil-galad saw in episode 1. Elrond makes to leave for overstaying his welcome, and Durin changes his mind and says he can stay. We go back to Galadriel and Halbrand, and we catch a glimpse of a pouch around Halbrand's neck, with a mysterious symbol on it. Galadriel and Halbrand go back and forth about elves, and Halbrand reveals orcs drove him from his homeland. Galadriel seems to think the symbol on Halbrand's pouch could be the mark of his people's king, and Halbrand says they have no king. Galadriel wants to know where these orcs were, and where Halbrand was from, and he says he has his own plans. And then we see a storm brewing on the horizon. Bronwyn is heading home, and we see a couple monuments, and the second one is quite interesting, as it shows an eagle killing a man. This totally checks out, as these people's ancestors sided with Morgoth, so to them, eagles would have been quite scary, and they likely faced them in battle or heard stories of them at some point. Bronwyn tries to warn everyone, but they're not having it. And Theo smashes a hole in the floor thinking it's mice he referred to in episode 1. Turns out it's actually an orc. Cut to Arondir following the tunnel, and he finds a long orc nail in the wall, Silence of the Lambs style. He realizes there's orcs coming from 2 directions, so he tries to make an escape in one of the more tense scenes we've had in the show. I love the rat scurrying away, as it's just another small thing that makes orcs a bit more scary than we've seen in previous adaptations. Arondir surfaces out of some underground water and gets snatched by hands from the darkness. In the trailers, I thought these were Ent hands, but seeing this in context, they're definitely orcs. Bronwyn returns home to find Theo hiding and an orc returning. She starts to leave to get help, but has a moment of decision, and I like that she decides to stay. I think it's kind of the natural mom thing to do when your baby's in danger. And now we have another delightfully creepy scene, with our first up-close interaction with orcs in this new interpretation of Middle-earth. As has been hinted at, their weakness for sunlight will come into play, and it looks like this orc has been scorched by it quite a bit. Theo and Bronwyn get some mother-son bonding by teaming up to take down an orc, and Bronwyn delivers the head to the villagers to say, "Let's get out of Dodge." Real quick, I have to say I love that we got a scene where just a single orc is a formidable force. I have nothing whatsoever against the depiction of orcs in Peter Jackson's movies, but as we're dealing with regular villagers and not the greatest warriors in Middle-earth, it makes sense that a single orc would inspire a lot of fear and be quite the handful for these two. We go back to Galadriel and Halbrand in the storm, where Galadriel is pulled underwater after tying herself to the raft. Halbrand dives in after her and, using her Two Trees dagger, cuts her free and saves her. Nori and Poppy return to the stranger, who looks at them super creepy-like. He then bursts open Poppy's lantern, releasing the fireflies. And just like Gandalf with the moths in Peter Jackson's films, Meteor Man whispers to the fireflies, and they make a constellation arrangement in the sky. Nori deciphers that they're stars, and that he presumably needs to find the land where those constellations appear, somewhere else in Middle-earth. Things take a dark turn when all the fireflies drop out of the air and die, with the stranger looking distraught. There's definitely a bit of an ongoing mystery here, as we get indications that the stranger may be good or evil. Side note, I don't think I've mentioned it yet, but his theme is another music track that I really enjoy. Next, Durin meets with his father, Durin III. And while I've said it in theories and breakdowns before, now that we know, I feel I should bring up that I'm not crazy about this idea of simultaneous Durins. The dwarves believe in reincarnation of their original father, Durin, and the name is bestowed on those dwarves who come along who are so incredibly alike in appearance and nature to the original Durin. Having two at the same time makes no sense to me. I've been told there's a method at work here, so I'm curious to see what it is and will try to stay open-minded about it. But it's just such a unique thing for the dwarves that it feels like that's being needlessly taken away. Durin III is mistrusting of Elrond coming to khazad-dum, while Durin IV says he's known Elrond for 50 years and would know if something was off. Durin III is clearly not very trusting of elves, and seems to be very secretive of their recent discovery, which I'm quite certain will be revealed next week to be Mithril. Now earlier I mentioned that Celebrimbor and Narvi create the Doors of Durin, and if the dwarves just now discover Mithril, it checks out that the doors would not exist yet. For Celebrimbor uses Mithril to invent Ithildin, the material that reflects starlight and moonlight and is used on the doors. Next we see Theo as the townsfolk are leaving, and he grabs the shard once again. This time blood trickles up his hand from a wound onto the sword, which begins to reform in his hand. While it's a bit more fiery, it still has a bit of a reverse Morgul blade effect to me. So I'm sticking with my theory that it's connected to the experiments with the unseen world. We close with Galadriel and Halbrand on the raft at sea, and the shadow of a figure on a boat. This is sure to be Elendil, another one of the characters I'm most looking forward to in this series. Presumably this means in episode 3 we'll be heading to Numenor. And like khazad-dum, I've thus far loved the music and the visuals of the island realm, so I'm excited to see it. Alright, so 2 episodes down, what are you guys thinking about the show? Who do you think the stranger is, and do you think Halbrand could be Theo's father? Halbrand says he was driven away from his home, and last episode we were told Theo's dad had left. If Halbrand does turn out to be Sauron, the idea of him having a kid is pretty bizarre, so I certainly hope that isn't the case. But I think if Halbrand turns into the Witch King down the road, it could create some interesting dynamics. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and we'll see you on Thursday night for the episode 3 watch party with a breakdown to follow. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil19, Listen Me the Cinda, Kella Brimbor, The Mighty Mim, Team Weasel, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, Toby Mob's Music, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Salim Rahman, Zetrock, Berto Berg, Grand Strategy Nerd, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Michael Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.